In today's tutorial, we're going to be creating these very satisfying looping animations using this super simple setup here with a cube, a cloner, a random field, and a plane effector. And I'm going to kind of go over why we're using a random field and a plane effector as opposed to just a random effector. And I'm going to kind of touch at the magnitude of variation you can achieve with this. And if you are new to cinema and looking at kind of exploring the effectors and the MoGraph suite in general, then this will definitely be of use to you. And I will say the tutorial may get a little bit more difficult as we go a bit further on when it comes to messing with the F-curves to kind of get this noise pushing through the clones in the middle and then easing off again. And also when we move into the Octane phase, I am going to be pushing color through it using the instance node, but on a general consensus, I don't think any of it is overly complicated. And if you are finding this difficult, or you're generally more interested in these scenes in general, there will be a pack of pre-made loop assets on my store, which doesn't require Octane or anything, but there will be Octane scenes included. So if you want to go check them out, then feel free. And without further ado, we will start making these very satisfying animations. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop in a plane, and this isn't too much of a fundamental step, but generally it's just good to lay down something. And I'm just going to increase the width to 4000 by 4000, and that's kind of going to cover us, just so you're not seeing through into the abyss, as there will be some gaps in between the clones. So next up, when it comes to picking your geometry, of course you can use absolutely anything. Now, I said in the intro, I want to hint at the variation you can do with this. You can have it scale up and down. You can have it jump up and down. You can do what you want. Now, I am going to focus, I think, somewhat on what you saw in the intro clip. Now, I did a couple different scenes, one with a cylinder and one with a cube. I could actually do both because the setup is extremely interchangeable. So right now, let's start with a cube. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make this cube a lot smaller, something of a rectangle, I think suits, and you can put on a little fillet, maybe 0.1, maybe that's a bit too small, maybe 0.5, maybe 1 actually. And I think something like this actually works pretty well. And what we're going to do now is just holding Alt underneath MoGraph, we're going to drop them in a cloner. I'm going to change the mode to honeycomb array, change the orientation to Y, and then you see the size width and the size height, we're just going to kind of bring them down. And we're going to kind of clamp everything together. You can see there, you got that nice kind of honeycomb shape. If I'm to turn down that offset, to get rid of it. And what we can do here is start messing with our width and our height to how far we kind of want this to go. So if I'm to change this to 50 by 50, you can see it now covers just about the whole space. And because of that, we can actually make things even more dense. And if you wanted to cover the edges there, you could do. I'll probably just leave it a little bit like this now. And what we're going to do next is we're going to select our cloner, go to MoGraph, holding Alt again. And what holding Alt does is just ensures that it's kind of connecting everything to the same tree and branch of children over there on the right. And what we're going to do is we're going to drop in a plane effector. Now, a plane effector, it kind of does what it says it does. It's plane. It is just kind of a attribution of, well, it's taking data that you tell it to. It's not really doing anything fancy until we put a fall off through it. So if you tell it to go up or down, it's going to move everything up and down. If you tell it to rotate, it's going to rotate. So that's kind of what that does. That's all it really does. What we're going to do is we're going to take our rotation B, or rotation banking, and we're going to type in 360. So now when we run our random field through it, what's going to happen is as we animate it, it is going to rotate 360 degrees on that banking axis, which is going to give it a full rotation, which is going to allow our loop. So I'm going to do something a little bit predetermined here, and that is I'm going to change this to 5 seconds. Your loop can be as long as you want it to. I'm just going to do 5 seconds. And then in the plane here, under the fall off, come down to where it says linear field. And this stuff can be a little bit scary, but we're just going to grab the random field. You can see what that does. It makes it random. Now, if you've been using Cinema for a little bit, you would be familiar with this guy, the random effector. He is kind of what the plane does, but he does it in a random sense. As of right now, that's kind of what we got. I like the random field because, well, you're about to see why. So if you select a random field here, I'm going to turn off this box because quite frankly it gets in the way. So you go to view settings, just turn on view plane, preview. And then in field, we're going to change the random mode to noise. And now we have a noise that we can change and kind of do what we want with. So I'm actually going to select a different noise. I'm going to select Ober. The normal purling noise doesn't really have a viewable pattern that we can see here. So, and you'll see why in a second. If I press F2 and we come up above here, and I do NA on the keyboard to get ground shading on, if I grab this tiny little yellow circle there, that is the scale tab here. And if I start dragging that up, at some point, you see the noise. That is the pattern of Ober. We can change this. Piezo, Buxo, and they will require different scales to kind of see. Naki is always a nice one. You can see here, you're seeing the noise. Let's go back to Ober. See something like that. I press F1 again and come back. You can see here the effect. Now, how do we make this loop? Everything about making this loop is in the remapping tab, specifically the strength and the min. What you want to do is take the inner offset and make it about 50. That's kind of your fall off. I don't know why it's not called that. But as you can see here, as we animate this, it starts normal, strength, you get a cool animation. It's flush, it's nice, but it doesn't loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to frame 0, holding control, hit the keyframe on the strength and the min, and then come to frame 150 and drag up the min, and you can see all the min is doing there is it's just turning them. It's completing that 360. Now that 360 is coming from this data here. If that was to go up, it would go up. So you can see how that correlates. Now, what we're also going to do is drag up the strength and hit control on that. And now, at some point, the noise starts to flow through in the loop. So how are we going to amplify that more? What we're going to do is we're going to go to our window and F-curve. And you can see the only keyframes we've got right now are the keyframes in a random field. Now remember, the min is controlling the spin. The strength is controlling the noise. And we don't want the min or the spin to have any kind of acceleration because it's a loop. So we don't want it to slow down and speed up. So you can select both of these here, dragging over, and you can hit this here and make them linear. And now you've got a constant speed, which is going to give you that loop. Well, smooth loop at least. And now what we can do with the strength is kind of tweak this to how we want it. So we can actually move this keyframe forward here to maybe about 3 seconds. And we could have this kind of propel forward a bit quicker. And now you can kind of see the effect that's going on. We've got this quick noise and then this slow kind of stop. But everything remains perfect and you get that perfect loop. And nothing is fixed here. I can start messing with the scale, make it look like a random factor, which isn't really what we want. I can scale it up, get some sort of kind of giant wave. It looks awesome no matter what we do. You can scale it in real time. It looks awesome. And you can see as I zoom out here, the very effect that we're getting. It's very reflective of your traditional noise, and it looks awesome. Now I mentioned earlier about how easy we could interswitch this geometry, and what's good about using things like MoGraph setups for something that looks very simulated like this is, well, you can change it on the fly. So in one of my versions, I used a cylinder. If we grabbed that, kind of left it quite similar to how it is by default. Put on a fillet, maybe make the radius about 1. We took out our cube here and put this in there. Now you can see it's him doing the work. And we could always rotate him down into the same position and now you're getting that same effect. It's maybe a little bit too thick actually. I won't mess with it too much, but you can see how easy that is to change. If you want, you can put both of them in, but that messes with the rotation a lot. Not really going to be a perfect loop. So I'm sure there's a way to do that though. We'll stick with the cubes for now, and we'll turn off our cylinder. Now I also mentioned about the kind of variation you can do with this. If we wanted to scale up the plane position here, what we could do is have this kind of scale halfway into the animation like this, and then come back down again. And how we would do that is we would come to the start frame, put a keyframe on 0 for the Y, maybe come about halfway in and jump it up, hit a keyframe, go to the end, put it to 0. Now the reason we've got to do 3 keyframes instead of 2 is because rotation is a 360. You can just through that value make it have the same data in space as it did at the start. Unfortunately, putting something 400 and odd centimeters up in the air, that's not 0. So it's not just going to recollect itself and put itself where it needs to be. Now what's going to happen is we're kind of going to get a little bit of a jump up, a nice kind of wave, and it's going to come back down again. And that just kind of adds to the anatomical look of the animation, especially if you're using a very scaled up noise. It looks very cool. Another thing we can do is put our animation speed to maybe 5% and put our loop period to 5 seconds. And again, it just gives a little bit of life to the way the cubes animate. They're going to kind of shake a little bit, and our noise is going to be directly affecting them. What we're going to move on to looking at next is color remapping, which you can find here. Let me just reselect color remap. We're going to look at pushing color through using Octane to get cool looks of color pushing itself through the noise as it animates. And you can see here the color should change. So what we'll do here is change this to gradient. And now there's actually going to be color shifting through the noise as it animates. And we're going to look at doing that with gradients through Octane nodes and just kind of getting different variation of colors pushing through it. I mentioned about the kind of variety you can achieve using the random field like this. And we're not just stuck to the random field, and this is what makes it so good, is because we're piping noises through it. But not only that, we're using it within Effectors, and this is a fall off. So in the fall off tab, you have blending options here. So what we can actually do, you can see I've got a box field as our main controller here. So you don't always have to animate in a random sense. You can use a box field, a spherical field, whatever kind of field you want, and then mask the random field to it so that the edges are randomized and then the contents of it become randomized, and you'll see an effect like this. So as you can see, if I was to turn that random field off, the edge would be smooth, but we're getting a noise breakup here due to the random field being on a subtract above the box field. So if we're to play that out from our view here, you can kind of see how the noise affects the box boundaries and then returns and gives you a smooth loop. So let's set something like that up here. So with a simple setup of the same fashion, we're going to just drop in a plane, turn off our position, come to rotation, stick 360. Hopefully I can go a little bit quicker now as you're a little bit familiar with the process from our first take on it. And then what we can do, for example, is we can maybe do a shockwave. So the way you would want to do that is probably with a spherical field. And you can see now we have this field here. As we expand that, we could get the cylinders to rotate out. So let's set this to 5 seconds. And with our spherical field, we want to animate the size most importantly. So we'll keyframe that, come to the top. And well, we want it a lot bigger than 100 centimeters. So we just want to flatten out the whole thing until it turns blue. And then we can keyframe that. And then we can kind of see the effect going on there. It looks very cool. Now what do we want to do? We want to push a random field through this so we kind of get some randomization on the edges. So what we want to do is just do Shift-C and type in R-A-N-D-O, wait till you get random field. Drag it underneath your plane, and you can see it went right in there. And you're just going to change this to subtract. Now it's only going to affect what the spherical field is affecting. So if we come into the random field, we'll turn off our view plane preview again, change the random mode to noise, change it to something more interesting like Ober, and then you can scale that up until we get that very anatomical look. It's breaking everything apart in a very structured manner. And then as we play this out, of course things are going to remain static, but you're now getting a bit of breakup around the edges here, as opposed to if you didn't, you just get a perfect circle. Now what we need to do to get this to, well, loop around is because it's getting stuck in a constant state right now, and we need to release that strength as the animation plays out. So if you keyframe the strength at the beginning, and then by the end have it hit 0, what's going to happen now is that it's going to slowly undo itself, and you're going to get that loop that you want. Now to get that to look good, we need to come back to our F curve and play with it and get the same effect. So the size could probably actually have a little bit of velocity to it. You could probably play with the size in a really nice way here, and kind of have it fast at the beginning and then coming to a slow stop. Like that. Maybe a bit slower. That's a matter of about half a second. And then in a random field, maybe you want this to be at the same velocity to achieve the same effect. Maybe even quicker. And like we did earlier, we could bring that keyframe forward. And now, technically, this should be a constant loop. I'll change this to lines. So the color is not influencing us. No, there is a little bit of a useless bleed here. Let's change that to 3 seconds. And watch this play out. It's cool. And if we look at this from above, we can see the effect of the noise impacting the shockwave and breaking it up. And again, if we turn off that random field, you can see how it goes from a perfect explosion to something much more broken up. And this is very easy to manipulate and change. You can change the noise at any moment and get whatever effect you want. So this was an effect I was quite keen to show you, as it is super useful. There will be multiple of these kind of more complicated setups in the asset pack on the store with shockwaves and kind of box fields and all sorts. So they're over there if you want to check them out. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to boot up Octane. I'm not really going to spend too much time making it look pretty. I don't really want that to be what this tutorial is. I think the actual setup of this animation does a lot of that. Although we will kind of do our basic resolution and aspect ratio there. And we'll maybe drop in a camera just so we can get a little bit of a nicer focal length on what we're seeing here. Now, I will drop in a texture environment, make it black, and I'm just going to put in a big light. Now, I'm just going to press F2, camera, perspective. It's a trick you would have seen in my other Octane tutorials, if you've seen them. We're just going to get a nice light set up. I'll maybe flip him around. Bring him over here. Like I said, I'm not explaining what I'm doing too much here because I just want to get on with the color. So I'll maybe drop in a fall off map and get some sort of nice lighting going on. I can't help myself. Right, okay. What we're going to do is we're going to drop in a Octane glossy material, any kind of material you want. I'm going to put that on the cube. Now, if you come to materials, Octane node editor, I'm going to assume most of you are familiar with this if you've been following my tutorials. If not, don't worry. It's not that scary. what we're going to do is grab a instance color, and then we're going to plug that into the diffuse. And then we're going to change the source to particle. And you're going to drag your cloner into the color source. And now if you hit play, you're going to see some color getting affected here. The same way we did before on standard render. Now, the kind of interesting part here about when I said the plane isn't totally useful, this is where it is useful, is we're going to put that same material on the plane. And that just kind of assures that whatever color is dominant among all of your geometry and your clones is kind of going to be the color on the plane, which helps. I'm going to put up a roughness here because there was a nasty reflection a second ago. I'm just going to do something like that. Maybe get a bit of a nicer view on this light. Now, let's say you want to get some really fancy colors going through this. What we're going to do is we're going to grab a gradient, an Octane gradient, and now we can start shoving what colors we want through this gradient. So what I'll do is maybe grab or in fact, I'll have it on black, have it maybe go to a coral color, and then a turquoise color, pink, and then white. You're going to see here, it's going to start on black, it's going to start to shift into coral, and then turquoise will come out shortly after pink, and shortly after your white. Now a lot of this is dictated by the speed of your keyframes. If you remember the strength, we made that super quick, which is why it's shifting through the colors so quick. And you can see we're not even halfway into the animation yet, and it's already coming out into that pink and in the white. So you can see that there, and then it's going to slowly rest into the white. Now you're probably wondering, how do you do this and keep your loop? Well, what you've got to assure is we can keep that white in, but the end of your gradient and the start of your gradient must be the same color if you want to keep that loop. And now you will end in black and you will start in black, but as the animation plays out, you're going to shift through all your wonderful colors, which is great. And it's that simple. That was all we had to do. So you can mess with that a lot. You can put as many colors in as you want. You can go absolutely crazy. And as we start to change the speed of the animation, so if I come back here into the F curve, and we come to our strength, and we can alter this, is it will alter where the colors are at that point in time, and kind of the speed of them. We can drag out that keyframe and make sure we get a little bit more life out of them before the black starts coming in. All sorts. It really is quite a simple process. You got nice renders just like that. I don't know how well it will react to me trying to play it back, but you can kind of get the gist there. Awesome stuff. So I am going to conclude the tutorial there. I will show you one more thing though. Okay, so I mentioned earlier the scale of what you can do with this. If you really wanted to take this bigger, you can use Octane Scatter to get the very same effect here. And you can see we're getting the same kind of animation running through this, using the exact same setup, except we're using an Octane Scatter instead of a cloner. And we jump into one of the other cameras here. You can just kind of see the scale, the look, the magnitude of this. It's massive, thousands and thousands of instances instead of maybe 100 or 200. And if you're interested in checking out this scene, you can see this over in the preset loop pack that will be on the store, which is super interesting. I'm going to conclude the tutorial there. We can drop back into that tutorial scene and look at some of the beautiful colors we just made. And I hope this tutorial came in useful. Mess around with it, honestly, just experiment, drop in different pieces of geometry, throw in different effectors, delay effectors, random effectors, throw them in, see what effects you can get. Make sure you're animating on those keyframes, and if it's not a rotational value, if it's scale or position, you need to do 3 keyframes and have it come back down. Of course, if you don't want a loop, that's redundant. It doesn't matter. Have fun, just animate. If you are animating in the boundaries of knowing you have to loop this, then, well, you're going to have to animate back down again. I was contemplating on what to call this, but I think the MoGraph loop is a appropriate title, as it's kind of banking on the range that you can get from using the MoGraph effectors here. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Please check out the assets. Check out my other tutorials if you haven't seen any of them. And I'll see you soon for another tutorial.